President Trump's ultimatum to Vladimir Putin that he better get on the peace train in 2 weeks or else is up. So what is or else? Well, the answer seems like it might just be nothing. But we're going to talk about what President Trump could do and what he's likely to do. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Slap that subscribe button and let's talk about Vladimir Putin probably getting another reprieve. So now, reportedly, says Trump is going to address the nation as Putin's ultimatum on Ukraine runs out, right? The deadline he set for Putin to make significant progress toward a peace deal with Ukraine has expired. Now, the bar that Putin had to leap over was extremely low. It was meet with Zelensky. And Zelensky has said, I'll meet with Putin fucking anywhere. I'll meet with him on a train. I'll meet him on a plane. I'll meet him I'll meet him for dinner. I'll meet him with Yannick Sinner, right? He would have done anything. And in contrast, Vladimir Putin has continually just sort of made up reasons to not meet with Zelensky, including such hot takes as Zelensky isn't even the real president of Ukraine, which is really one of the hot takes of all time. And so, can you tell I have a 2-year-old at home? So, what is he going to face in terms of consequences for defying President Trump, right? Well, the answer appears to be nothing. Now, the White House press office has said there is an address at 2 p.m. Washington time, but nobody knows what Trump is going to say. And as we've talked about, Trump has been kind of incognito for 2 weeks, which has been pretty weird. But it's, well, hard to know, as you can see, what exactly is going on, right? As we pointed out, Putin stan and Turkish autocrat Erdogan has said that the Putin and Zelensky are not ready for a face-to-face meeting, which is funny because Zelensky has said, I'm absolutely ready to meet with him. And, well, Putin has said, no, I can't because of but. Yeah, the Ukrainian president has repeatedly voiced readiness for a direct meeting with Putin, urging the U.S. to impose tougher measures on Russia if he continues to avoid talks. And Lavrov said that a Zelensky-Putin meeting was, quote, not ready at all, accusing Ukraine of rejecting several preconditions and questioning Zelensky's legitimacy, right? And this is key, is that Russia has said, well, if you want to meet with us, you have to engage in a bunch of preposterous things, right? You'll say, if you want to meet, you have to withdraw your forces from key prepared defensive positions. Right? That's not a condition for a peace deal. It's not a condition for a ceasefire. These are conditions for meetings, for just sitting down with Putin in the same chair. And so this kind of absurdity is something that, again, the rest of the international community, almost everyone else, every other government on planet Earth has recognized as kind of the farce that it is, right? Except, of course, for President Trump, who seems unable or unwilling to simply say the magic words of Putin needs to face consequences. And as we've talked about, if you're Vladimir Putin, there is no reason to speak of for you to, well, stop. Why? Because the longer the U.S. engages in this sort of, well, we don't know who we're going to support mentality, the longer that goes on, the more you have, the stronger the Russian position gets, at least by Putin's own assessment. He says, listen, the longer I stall, the more I, Russia, stand to strengthen myself relative to Ukraine. And again, as we've talked about, that's not clear that that's truly the case, but it's clear from Putin's statements and actions that he believes he is close to grinding down the Ukrainian military to nothing. And so for President Trump, the only way he can get Putin to the negotiating table is to change Putin's fundamental balance of power calculus, because Putin is nothing if not a realist, right? And I don't mean that in the sense that he perceives reality correctly. I mean it in the sense that his worldview is that of international realism, which says that power is the tool that enables you to do the things you want for your country. And Putin right now believes he has more power than Ukraine and that his power relative to Ukraine is growing the longer the war goes on. What he has to do is experience a change in mentality where he says, wow, the war is going so badly for me. I'm economically sanctioned. My military has inferior equipment. The Ukrainians are receiving additional equipment and funding that I do not. The calculus needs to change where he says continued war makes my position worse as time goes on. And he is the one who is not willing to do so. It's one of the reasons why he's repeatedly refused ceasefires, is because he feels that any ceasefire of any length and duration, any meaningful length and duration, is going to strengthen Ukraine more than it's going to strengthen Russia. Because you have to think, Russia conducts offensive actions, throwing troops into Ukrainian defensive positions. If both sides stop fighting, well, Russia can improve its defensive positions, and so will Ukraine, but if Russia is on offense, well, they're going to throw themselves at harder, improved Ukrainian positions. And again, this is very simple calculus because realism is a really effective way to understand the way countries work with each other. And once you view it that way as being power and agency, it makes the world a much easier place to understand. And it is right. So the U.S. has a lot of options on the table. It can include everything from, as we know, continuing to give Ukraine military equipment and intelligence sharing. It can even escalate aspects of the conflict, for example, providing air support to the Ukrainian armed forces, right? Again, as we point out, the Russian air defenses, which it provided to Iran to defend against Israeli strikes, were completely powerless against Israeli F-35s. So it's probably a clue that the U.S. Air Force could easily wipe Putin's invasion force off the map. But also, there's robust sanctions that could still hit the Russian economy, right? A lot of Russian oil, a lot of Russian, as Trump has pointed out, secondary sanctions are absolutely on the table. But there's also Russian assets that have been frozen overseas that the Europeans have said, listen, they've never actually seized those Russian assets. They've at most taken the proceeds, the profits from the investments those Russian assets are held in, like bank accounts or stocks and bonds, and provided those proceeds to Ukraine. But they've never actually said, listen, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are sitting in accounts in Europe that are the Russian state assets could be provided to Ukraine that would allow them to sustain the fight for years to come. That's never been done, right? So the fact is that it's a classic case of the Russians believe they are in an all-out war against the West and against Ukraine, and the West believes they're in a lover's tiff, that they're going to kiss and make up, that we don't want to make him too mad. It's like he's literally slaughtering millions of people. He's engaged in a systematic campaign to deport Ukrainian children and raise them as Russian as part of a plan to exterminate Ukrainian culture. Like what else does he have to do? He's targeting hospitals with missiles. Like what else does he have to do for the Europeans to say, maybe we should just seize some of his assets. Maybe we should just stop buying Russian oil entirely. It's kind of absurd. It is signaling again to the country's enemies, the enemies of the United States and the enemies of Western Europe, that this is that the West is so covered in red tape, covered in hand-wringing, nervous about every single little tiny thing, about making every single dictator mad, that they're unwilling to do anything. Right? As we pointed out, people are like, well, what if Putin uses nukes? Guys, Putin didn't pull out the nuclear card. One, Putin knows pulling out the nuclear card will probably backfire. Because as the West said, if you launch a nuke at Kiev, the Western militaries will have to intervene, and we will wipe the Russian armed forces out of Ukraine entirely. Like, that will be our red line to intervene. And of course, if you were to nuke a NATO country, right, we would destroy Russia in its entirety. that is mutually assured destruction. That's been policy for 85 years. But the Russian military also, Putin didn't consider using nuclear weapons when they were being forced out of Kharkiv in 2022. Then they were forced out of Kherson in 2023. So major strategic Russian defeats, right? And they were forced back from Kiev at the initial invasion. None of those things Putin considered using his nuclear stockpile. So somehow, right, he has effectively scared the West into doing something that he has shown literally that he will not do. He goes, maybe this will be the time I nuke you. It's like, dude, worse things have happened and you didn't nuke us then. So it's absurd. It's a joke. It's a total joke. And again, like this, it's a joke to everybody that knows, right? This is like saying the North Vietnamese going, well, we better not try to defeat the United States because what if they nuke Hanoi? They understood that the U.S. was not going to nuke Hanoi, that strategic nuclear weapons are for strategic deterrence. That's it. And the North Vietnamese won. The U.S. literally showed they would rather lose than nuke. That's how these countries work. That's how wars of choice work like this. So all this to say, the idea, the Washington calculus, right? The answer is clear. The solution is clear. Additional consequences need to be levied against the Russian state. And almost everybody in the U.S. administration is saying so. Well, but are they? See, U.S. Secretary of Treasury, who would be involved in the sanctions process, Scott Bessent, says they're looking very closely in response to Putin having done the opposite of following through on what he's indicated, which is, well, looking very closely at things is kind of stupid, right? How many of your friends go, yeah, I'm looking really closely at working out? That's code for this dude's never going to be in the fucking gym, right? We all know this. When somebody goes, I looked at joining the military. I looked closely at joining the military. That dude was never going to join the fucking military, right? We all know people who operate this way. So when someone like Scott Bessent, who also looked really closely at, say, tariffing China or doing any other number of policy actions, usually has said, well, you can usually assume that the answer is they're going to do fuck all. And as he says, all options are on the table. That's another code for, yeah, dude, all options are always on the table. That's how running a country works. Yeah, they are always on the table. You're the the President Trump is the commander in chief and the head of U.S. foreign policy. Like, all options are always on the table all of the time. This is stupid, right? And again, the fact that even Scott Bessent, who has very, very, very little foreign policy experience, is still able to come to the conclusion that Putin has done the opposite of following through on what he's indicated he wanted to do. But is it going to do anything? No. And why do I think that? Because here's the schedule, the official schedule for today. 2 p.m., the president's going to make an announcement. And per the White House, the announcement is related to the Department of Defense, which, as we just pointed out, sanctioning Russia is a function of the Department of Treasury. So what this probably is, relating to the Department of Defense, they're probably going to announce the change of name that Trump asked for, changing the Department of Defense back to the Department of War, which it was in the 1800s, because, well, going to war is, almost nobody says that anymore, because almost no country says that no country wants to be known as the warlike country, okay? So they all call it the Ministry of Defense, or just like the Army, right? They'll call it like the Army or the military, right? The Department of the Military. So that's what that is. That's what that's going to be. Also because, President Trump, he hasn't been working diligently, right? He claims he's been golfing, but he's been kind of out of sight, out of mind for days. He has not prepared some kind of big, stunning foreign policy action. It just hasn't happened. So you're going to see a bunch of nothing. I'm almost certain of it. And we're going to go back to the status quo, which is Vladimir Putin gets a pass to do anything he wants. If you guys want access to uncensored combat footage, including stuff sent to me straight from the front lines, sometimes even with units using gear that we purchased for them, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. That keeps me independent and enables me to continue to speak truth to power. The link is in the description. A huge thank you to our Colonel tier members like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gow, Officer Merle, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, Jeff Javies, Mike 54, Supreme Margaret, GMAT Club, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. You guys are the OGs. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.